Thank you for joining us for today's training session. Thank you for attending today's training on best practices for on-farm cold storage. This is a technical assistance program provided by NC Growing Together, the Natural Capital Investment Fund, and North Carolina Cooperative Extension. This training is designed to give you the basic principles and practices for installing on-farm cold storage units, whether you're using them for meats or for produce. We have 3 experts from Cooperative Extension who will be with us today. Your first presenter will be Craig Mauney. He's the Extension Area Specialized Agent in Agriculture in the Mountain Horticulture Crops Research and Extension Center in Western North Carolina. Adam McCurry is an A&T agriculture technician from Yancey County, and Eddy Labus is an extension agent in agriculture at the Watauga County Center. Once the presentations are finished, you will see some resources and information that can help you as you move forward with installing on-farm cold storage units. There will be several guides and downloads that you can use. And after the training has been completed, you should email Rebecca Dunning, who is the project manager for NC Growing Together, to confirm that you have completed the technical assistance component of your financing package for the grant and loan program. NC Growing Together and the Natural Capital Investment Fund are releasing this grant and loan program in the fall of 2017. It's designed to provide a combination of grant and loan funds to assist farmers in North Carolina with installing on-farm cold storage so that they can expand and increase their sales of local and regional products into more mainstream markets. The training is going to cover topics like installation, use, and management for both purchased and constructed units for meat and for produce. If you need any additional information during the training or afterwards, please visit ncgrowingtogether.org, and you can access all of our resources online there. With that, I will turn things over to Craig Mauney.
Yes, let's take a look at the overview of the cold storage just in a general framework. And when considering cold storage on your farm as an option to market your crops that you've harvested and you want to market them at a later time, it's important that you look at some parameters for the type of unit you're going to consider. There's lots of them out there. So what kind of storage do you need? It'll depend on the crop itself, the volume, and you know, the bulk of what you're planning to grow and store. It'll also depend on how much you can sell immediately. How much will you need to hold for later sales? So you may be able to sell all of it right now, or you may need to hold it a little later, and that's the whole purpose in having the cold storage. One parameter to consider is how long will the produce I'm growing last in a cold storage facility? You know, how long will I need to store it before I can sell it or move it to the buyer that is waiting for my product? The usual length of storage on the farm is from a short time period, say 30 days or less, to a longer time period up to 3 to 6 months. Make sure your crop is compatible with the type of unit you're looking to purchase or build. So you need to find out what the needs are of that particular crop and that unit. So you're going to look at what controls of temperature, humidity, ethylene, even odor of the crop that you'll have in your unit, and will the unit handle all those things. Next, you need to think about how much money do you have to invest in the cold storage unit. Are you going to be able to get financing? A good example would be a 12 by 12 walk-in cooler, very basic, can cost as much as $9,000. And electric costs for those kind of units would be around $2 or so per day. A small refrigeration unit, say like a CoolBot, can be around, say, $3,000, $3,800. Next, let's look at the types of units that are out there. I just want to mention maybe 5 of them, typical. One that we've looked at for generations is a root cellar. And a root cellar is really energy efficient, but it only uses ground temperature and some outside air that you pull in for cooling. A vent needs to be provided with the root cellar. to provide to vent out the warm air and the gases that form with your vegetables and fruits. There are little or no electricity needed except for maybe a fan, if you have a fan to pull in the cool and remove. The cellar is not suitable for removing field heat, and field heat removal is very important. The next unit would be something like a refrigerator. It's a self-contained unit, of course, and it works great for smaller quantities of crop that you're going to hold for a short period of time. There's not really a good humidity control with a refrigerator or real good air exchange if you're needing to take some of the field heat out. Solid doors on a refrigerator are more energy efficient than the glass doors. And the refrigerator does have a very limited capacity to remove field heat. A larger refrigerator, sometimes you can move a little air in it, but it's really used, refrigerators, for short term only. A walk-in or a drive-in type cooler, the built-in place types, these are the workhorses for the industry that all of those farmers strive for when we get up to a size where we can use them. They're usually modular. They come in panels and are easily built in place. The features include a lot of different things, including computer access, such things as lockable doors, drains if you need to wash down the inside and it is washable. You know, those kind of units are well insulated. They have good temperature control and so on. You can just add lots of bells and whistles on there. The next one would be something we would call a self-contained unit. And this is usually a trailer, a small one, or even a reefer type, you know, that's pulled behind. A cool bot, which a lot of people have looked at, is a good example of this type of self-contained unit. There is a higher heat loss and a heat gain with these self-contained units. So you're going to need something like a 2.5, 2 1/4, up to a 3-inch of foam insulation to hold that self-contained unit temperature better. The refrigeration system is small in the self-contained unit, and it's really only used to maintain the produce in a cool state once you've removed all of the field heat. The airflow in this type of unit is not ideal and usually has to have supplementation. So if you're going to use that with produce, you've got to add some airflow in there. And actually getting in and handling the material that you've put in there sometimes can be a challenge that's in there. Let's move on now and look at some of the refrigeration type systems that you'll be considering once you decide what kind of unit you're going to have. And for any new system, the type of refrigerant to use is an R404A. Always avoid the R12 and R22 types when buying the used units, as you'll need to, you know, because R12 was banned in, I think, 2015, and it'll have to be converted. The R134A is still acceptable, but you'll have to look at some point transferring these types of systems over. Next, the evaporator fan motors is one thing to look at, or the types of motors in the system. The evaporator fan motor is a higher cost to operate than a regular compressor that you'll see in a lot of the refrigeration units. With the EC type evaporator fan motor, you can get a great efficiency up to 80%, which is what we strive for, especially with the walk-in types. And it's something that you need to look at and consider. When you size your refrigeration system, there are a lot of things to consider and a lot of parameters to look at. One of the main ones is field heat removal. Is that refrigeration system going to have to operate and help you with that field heat removal? If so, make sure you probably look at your fan system and make sure your airflow is good. Heat gain with like your lights and your fan. A lot of times folks don't, they're building their own, don't consider that the heat comes off of the lights that you're going to be using, and the fan itself will actually produce heat. And the conduction heat gain, if you've got this unit out in the field, especially with the sun hitting it, if it's located in the sun all day, you've got to take that into consideration as well on there. Taking a really good look at field heat would be our next activity, and that's so important when you're looking at an on-farm cold storage facility or a unit that you're going to maintain. You know, and there's a lot of factors that affect the removal of the field heat. One of those is the types of packaging and containers you're going to use inside the unit for long-term storage. Is it going to be slotted? Is it going to be solid? Or are you going to have to be able to even put a slurry in there to take the field heat out? What kind of usage of containers? Maybe plastic containers even. You know, looking at the low refrigeration capacity. You know, can you handle the load that you put in there? If your temperature is really high, you put something in there to take the field heat out. How long does it take to take that heat out? Airflow rates. You know, make sure you've got good airflow rate or accommodate for airflow. You need to do, if you don't remove the field heat, the quality goes down. So you have a big reduction in quality. And some of those things, you'll have over-ripening, you'll wilt, spoilage. The shelf life will go way down really quick if you don't have the field heat removed. To kind of summarize the overview, there's two websites that I recommend you to look at a lot of overviews of cold storage. One of them is the NC Growing Together website. They have an infrastructure toolkit. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. And then the other one is the North Carolina Produce Safety. There's a lot of post-harvest information located there, and you can compare the vegetables and fruits to what you're trying to cool. So that kind of sums up an overview of the on-farm cold storage.
Thank you, Craig.
Yes.
All right, Adam?
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to now take some of Craig's presentation and delve a little deeper as it pertains to vegetables and produce. And a couple of key important things to remember is what products are you going to be storing, and if you are a very diverse operation, the considerations there. We will also be talking about the access to the unit. Keep in mind the idea of a on-farm cold storage is to increase productivity, increase sales volume by being able to preserve these products longer, and to expand the marketing window. But on the flip side, if some thought and planning is not put into the unit up front, the loss of inefficiency as far as using the unit can offset the gains in the end. And we'll also talk a little bit about the building codes, something that I have ran into, and some food safety concerns. So we'll move on and start with some of the products that you're looking to store. Every crop, every product has an ideal storage temperature, and they are some crops that work well together. For instance, if you're growing brassicas, you're doing cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, you know, you can store those pretty much in the same temperature and humidity requirements. If you're growing summer squash, tomatoes, and broccoli, then you have two different temperature requirements. The summer squash and the tomatoes are pretty close, and then you have the broccoli, which is quite a bit different. It's about 20 degrees cooler. So if you're doing a one unit for all things, you may look at up front retrofitting that unit into different temperature zones, which are available. In some cases, it requires another unit to be put in and a petition. Some have creative ways of pulling air in and out with a blanket petition. That is something to consider. Humidity concerns, same thing. Some products need a higher humidity, some need a lower humidity. And if you try to commingle those two, once again, you're losing the benefit of the on-farm storage. You can actually do more damage to the crop in storage than if you had no storage at all in some cases. So know your operation, know the post-harvest and handling requirements for each crop before you begin into the cold storage realm. In some instances, you have no other choice but to have separate cooling units. You may also have crops that require different temperatures and different humidities, but if their timing is far enough spaced, you would want to look at a unit that is flexible enough that you can change it to meet the crop coming in at that time. Huge concern. Will there be a need for top icing? With food safety being coming to the forefront in recent years, a lot of markets are moving away from top icing. Some markets still require it on some crops. Two that come to mind are broccoli and sweet corn. If you are going to have to top ice the products in cold storage, you must have a floor drain to remove the melted water from the unit. Worked with a group of growers that were doing sweet corn, doing some top icing, and we basically created a very nice indoor pond. And you know, there's lots of concerns with that much standing water. If it is a crop that requires high humidity, but the market does not want top ice due to food safety, then you have to have some way to introduce that humidity into that unit. These are much easier accomplished up front than as a retrofit. It is very difficult to floor drain in a cooling unit of any type once the unit is in place and stored. Now, if you're doing some of the trailers and refrigerator units or cool box units that Craig was talking about, that's much simpler. But if it's a stationary standalone, particularly a modular unit, that is a huge problem. So that needs to be a consideration up front. Will there be a need for different zones for other reasons? Food safety, ethanol, etc. Now, the food safety reason that's in there is there are some operations that will store product that is unwashed or uncleaned, and they will be storing it with clean product. So if, once again, if you're looking to do a multiple use unit, you need to think of that up front. You will need a partition between the two to keep it separate, and you will also need separate entrances into the cooler. Same with ethanol. Of course, with ethanol, you preferably almost required to put it in a totally different unit. It is very hard to stop the ethanol from transferring from one partition into another. But there are several reasons to consider that. Okay, we'll move on to some other issues I've ran into. Access to the unit. Think big. Always think big. It is much easier to move boxes of product through a large door than it is to try to move pallets of product through a small door. Once again, we're looking at efficiency. If we're bringing product out of the field on a pallet, on a truck, or something like that, and we're having to break that pallet down and repalletize it in the cooler, and then break that pallet down when it comes out of the cooler and repalletize it on the way out to the final market, you're losing efficiency. And you're also doing a lot of time with the doors open and losing a lot of refrigerated air. It is critical. I would recommend to anyone that's doing any type of cooler unit other than just a small refrigerator unit for individual or by piece sales to minimally put a pallet size door in that unit. Keep in mind on how the product will flow. The first in, is it always going to be the first out? So where do you put that cooler or that door in that cooler? Believe it or not, that is a huge concern in coolers because of wasted space. If you don't put some thought and idea or thought and preparation into access to the cooler, it can become a big issue if you have a lot of product flow in and out. Sounds simple, but until you try to work with one that is not laid out correctly, it is very, very difficult to see the issues that can crop up. How will the product be stored in the cooler? And that kind of goes back to some of Craig's presentation is, what kind of packaging are you going to be using in the cooler? Is it going to be slotted? Is it going to be solid? Is it going to be bulk bins? Is it going to be individual place pack units? Or is it going to be boxes, wholesale boxes? Or is it going to be in the retail clamshells? All of that goes into factor of the logistics of moving the product in and out of the cooler. So we'll move on to some other issues. Building codes and food safety. Working with a group of farmers, I was completely unaware of the fact that in our area that the building code requires overhead sprinklers inside a cold storage unit, regardless of the type of unit. If an individual is able to enter that unit, it must have a fire suppression system. Well, that is a very, very expensive proposition. We are talking to the tune of 5 cooler units. We're talking to the tune of about 60 grand for the fire suppression system. Also, the water that system is charged with must be potable. Food safety, if it has potential of coming in contact with the product, it must be potable water. Please keep that in mind. Check your building codes before you pursue that, because what we ran into, we had the units built, ready to go, everything wired, and the building inspector wouldn't let us turn the power on to them until we had those overhead sprinklers in place and we had product coming in. Another thing to think about with the fire sprinklers is there's other fire suppression techniques that meet code but do not work well with fresh produce. So a water sprinkler system, from what we looked at, was the best option. It was an expensive option, but it was the best option. Will there be products stacked? And the reason for this question is, if you're not stacking product on a walk-in cooler, you don't need the cooler no taller than the door. If it won't fit through the door, you won't be taking it in and stacking it. And if you build the cooler much higher, then you have a dead space, wasted space that you're having to maintain temperature and humidity in. So keep that in mind. Or if you're taking product in and then stacking it inside, for instance, bulk bins, if you're taking them in and putting them on top of one another inside the unit with a fork truck or pallet jack or however, that's fine. But if you're not doing that, you really don't need that vertical space. It was cheaper in the long run to expand the footprint of the cooler, both lengthwise and widthwise versus vertical. And another huge thing to consider, and I'm talking about floor drains, where they put in the sprinkler systems, doors, etc. If you're doing an on-farm storage, cold storage unit, please, please, please keep in mind that you must secure it from pests. And if you have a floor drain, you know, it's grading, different types of restrictive things to keep pests from entering through the drain. And I believe that will conclude, or do I have one more slide? That will conclude my presentation.
Thank you very much, Adam. All right, Eddy.
Hello. So when we think about on-farm storage of meats, we need to determine, the first thing is what size of unit that we will need. And there's basically 3 units that are available: a chest freezer, a upright freezer, or an independent walk-in unit. Now, some of the things I'll discuss with all 3 of these units are location. It is very essential that you think about that up front. What is the available power on your farm? What resources are around local for repair and assistance? Always keeping in mind a plan for the future and what your goals are. Having alarms and alerts in place. And then I'll talk about some sources that you might find for information and product of the freezers. So location is probably the most essential thing when we think about on-farm access to meat. So even though this is longer-term storage, maybe even up to 6 months, we want to think about an area that has easy access, that is either gravel or paved. We must think about weather conditions all year round, because we are receiving and shipping or selling, and we need to be able to have access. One thing to consider is if you're having your product delivered from the abattoir back to you, what size of truck that is, and can they get in easily. So we can locate any of these freezers inside, or they can be freestanding outside, and that is a consideration when you're locating a chest freezer or an upright freezer on the inside. You want to make sure that you have plenty of room. Meat is heavy, and you want to be able to get in and out easily. You also need a well-lit and secure location that can be locked. Even if it's a freestanding system that's outside, you need to make sure that you have some type of security. All right. The next thing is available power. And in helping several producers that have located units on their farm, the one thing that they say is the biggest surprise is, what are the power requirements for the unit? And most of our walk-in freezers are 220 three-phase. And when you start talking about adding three-phase lines, it's very expensive to run that across your farm. And many places may not even have available three-phase electricity coming in, so you may be limited. If you look at multiple chest freezers or upright freezers, I recommend having a separate power source for them from your house, and make sure that that box is big enough to run however many that you're going to have. We also want to make sure that our storage is large enough that we can expand in the future. And one thing to think about when choosing which type of freezer that you want to locate on your farm is, what type of products and what are your goals for the future. If your goal is to double your production every year for a couple of years, you may want to look at putting in a larger freezer to begin with. If your goal is to maintain what you're doing and you know square footage that you need, multiple chest freezers or an upright freezer may be sufficient for what you're looking for. One of the most important things when we talk about power and freezers is having some type of alarm and alert system in place. Power failures is the one thing that comes to most people's mind when we talk about freezers. However, there are other issues with a freezer besides a power failure, such as just the condenser may not be running well enough to keep the temperature at 0 or below. Most of these freezers need to be maintained at a -10 to 0 degrees, or we can run into food safety issues. There are several systems out there that will record temperatures hourly and will send alarms to you over an app system or email or a phone call, so that you know if the temperature has risen above 0 degrees, or you can set it even higher so that it may be a 15 degree. If it reaches over 15 degrees, you're going to get an alert. I think this is essential to have in there so that you have data to make sure that your product is staying frozen and maintains its safety. Also, when we think about electric and long-term storage of meat, we need to have a backup plan for natural disasters or inclement weather and power loss. So whether that's a generator, or if you have a natural disaster, a location that you may be able to take meat, or a plan in place of what you can do. Having a generator available, I would strongly advise, so that a power loss or a natural disaster, that it is sufficient to at least run your freezer and maintain your product. Another thing to consider with alarms and alert is who is going to be repairing your unit. A lot of the units, if you're talking a walk-in freezer, you're going to purchase online or you're going to purchase from a larger company that's going to come in and install. And these freezers are actually custom built, so you can actually get, if you want a 5x6 or whatever is going to fit your situation, you can have them custom built. But you do need to make sure and talk to a repair person in your area and have a relationship with them so that they understand what your freezer is and that they will service that specific unit. Now, when we look at resources, used freezers, there are walk-ins, used walk-in freezers out there. Many restaurants, when they close, may have walk-in freezers that are available, and you can find them online. I would advise before purchasing any kind of a used freezer to have a licensed technician to examine it, to make sure that the proper refrigerant is used, and to make sure that the unit is operable and will not require many repairs. So there's a lot of local sources. To me, the closer you can buy your freezer, the better you are going to have as far as repairs goes. The internet, there's lots of sources out there. I did not list any specific, but the websites and these companies that sell in these walk-in and the chest freezers, commercial chest freezers, are very helpful in determining what you need and what will fit your goals long term. And I think that talking to them is one of the most important things to access what you specifically want. One thing that I will add on any refrigeration or freezing unit is to make sure that you're maintaining an inventory list with dates that product is coming in and product is leaving, and that you have a rotation system for them. And I would just like to thank Shipley Farm Signature Beef for their input and help in this presentation.
Thank you very much, Eddy. Before we close out the training, I want to make sure that you're aware of several resources that you can use to learn more about best practices for installing this type of storage on your farm. One is the on-farm infrastructure toolkit that Craig mentioned at the beginning. You can see from the table of contents here what it's going to have in it. There are case studies from North Carolina farms demonstrating these different types of units being constructed on different farms for different usage. You can also look at storage that involves cooling and washing elements as well as funding sources and grants and loans. Some additional resources. The first stop, of course, should always be your North Carolina Cooperative Extension Office in your county. There is one in all 100 counties and on the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. You can find that online using this link. NC Growing Together's resources include a couple of different things that may be useful to you. There are several resources for producers interested in selling wholesale or moving into larger markets, particularly around storage, GAP certification, and meeting the needs of larger buyers. And this spec guide for produce is also being provided to you as a part of this technical assistance program, and that has ideal storage parameters in it for several of North Carolina's most common crops. So you are more than welcome to download that if you have not received it already. For meats and meat storage, NC Choices offers technical assistance to providers across the state, and you can see that at ncchoices.com. And then Cooperative Extension also has a very comprehensive guide to constructing and funding a pack and cool unit, which are the mobile units that Craig discussed in the beginning. And that link is there for you as well, where you can download all of that information. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I want to thank all of our presenters, Adam, Craig, and Eddy, one more time for their expertise and their knowledge. We are really lucky to have such incredible people on staff at Cooperative Extension here in the state. If you have any questions after completing the training or you need more information, please feel free to contact Rebecca Dunning, who is the project manager for NC Growing Together, at rebecca_dunning@ncsu.edu. Thank you very much for attending, and good luck in your endeavors.